The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
We are back, in case you're wondering, with George Case. I'm Ralph Tyko with the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network, and the man himself is here to introduce a panel of folks to talk baseball. George Case.
Well, thank you, Ralph. It's my pleasure. And before we do, I just want to mention our sponsorship of Comfortably Zoned Radio. And in case you're wondering, with George, we do have a DVD that we are currently selling. It's a 60-minute in-color DVD about World War II era Major League Baseball. And it's been very well received. We've been selling it now for the last couple of years, and we've had so many wonderful comments. So it is available. It's $29.95. We're offering a 10% discount with anyone with the promo code GWC. So if you're interested in this very rare color footage of the inside look at Major League Baseball from a ball player's perspective, not game footage, but actually taken, and the narration and the color footage was from my father and Mickey Vernon. So it'd be something if you would like to, use it as a gift or just as a memento of World War II era baseball history. I'd like to encourage you to take a look and consider purchase of the DVD. Now, my commercial is over, so what I'd like to do is to introduce our panel.
Real quick, your commercial's over, but you you get to talk a little bit, and before you introduce our panel, real quick, talk about the making of the product, the DVD or CVD. I'm such a dinosaur. But talk about the making of it and the fun you had in doing that.
Well, yeah, thank you, Ralph. Yeah, before we do the panel introduction, then I just wanted to mention that in case anyone is interested in how we put it together, it was really 8mm color home movie footage that my dad took during his baseball career. And I was fortunate because I saw it as a little boy, and at some point later in life, I decided to really, make it into a DVD because I thought it had great historical significance. So what you see there is the color footage, originally in my dad's handheld 8mm camera, and then later on Mickey Vernon did the same thing, and we put it together into a 60-minute DVD. So it captures the time when Major League Baseball was really being played to help the morale of the country. It was all during World War II. President Roosevelt had given the green light for Major League Baseball to continue. So you see footage of the players, the old stadiums, spring training, bus rides, everything in the life of a Major League ball player as a ball player, not as a fan, but as a ball player. So that's what this is all about, and I really enjoyed putting it together because it gave me an opportunity to, convey my dad's thoughts and love of playing baseball, and I grew up in it, and I enjoyed very much the opportunity to put it together.
Thank you, George.
Okay, now. Right. Now our panel, today we're going to be talking about Branch Rickey, and many of you know of Branch Rickey. He's certainly a legendary figure in baseball, and we're going to have Ronnie Rabinovitz, who's a devoted Brooklyn Dodger fan and has a tremendous background in the history of Jackie Robinson and Branch Rickey, and Ronnie's going to be talking about it, and I'm going to add a few things that I knew about Branch Rickey, but also, our panel members are Alan Blumkin. Alan is a person who is extremely knowledgeable about baseball, and we always enjoy his comments during the podcast. And Don Stokes, who has a website devoted to the New York Jets called Freezing and Flushing, but Don is also a great baseball fan. So we're happy to have Don with us as well. So along with, Alan and Don and Ralph and myself, I'm going to turn it over to Ronnie. And Ronnie, would you introduce the subject, Branch Rickey, and talk a little bit about your relationship with Jackie and the Brooklyn Dodgers.
Sure, I'll be happy to, George. Welcome, everybody. Jackie, of course, and Branch Rickey had a very unusual and wonderful relationship. I would say that Branch Rickey was probably one of the closest people to Jackie during this period of time. And a lot of people don't know, but Branch Rickey used to be a baseball coach at, I believe it was Illinois Wesleyan University. And he had a African-American catcher that was on the team. And they were going somewhere to a ball game out of town. And they started signing in, registering at the hotel. And the manager said, this guy can't stay here because he's black. And Branch Rickey said, listen, son, go up to my room and I will do what I can do. And he was arguing with the manager, and he said, listen, so then he'll stay in my room. So the manager said that was okay, but he couldn't have his own room. So when he came back up to the room, Branch Rickey found this kid sitting on the bed, on the edge of the bed, crying, scratching his arms and legs, and saying, why do I have to be black? Why do I have to? And he was just hysterical. And that left a lot on Branch Rickey. And he was the one that decided that Major League Baseball was not an all-American sport until all Americans were able to play it. So he went, what they call an experiment. He went out and he started scouting and having his scouts scout Negro League baseball players. And they had to find the right person, because this was going to be a very, very tough assignment to have someone come in. Now, he kind of liked Josh Gibson, but Josh Gibson was a heavy drinker, and he didn't want any problems with this. He didn't want anything to backfire, anything that the bigots could use against the first African-American ball player. He liked Satchel Paige. However, Satchel Paige was a womanizer, and they didn't want that. So they went out and they finally scouted Jackie Robinson. And Clyde Suckworth, who was the scout at the time, went out to Kansas City, where Jackie was playing, and told him that Mr. Rickey would like to see him in Brooklyn, in New York, for a possibility of starting a new league called the Brown Dodgers. And he told Jackie to come with him, and Jackie agreed. And when they got there to his office in Brooklyn, he said to Mr. Rickey, he said, I believe that you wanted me to play for the Brown Dodgers. Let me explain this, what league it is, what team it's going to be, and everything. And he said, Jackie, you're not here to become with the Brown Dodgers. You're here for the Brooklyn Dodgers. And it really floored Jackie, because he never expected that he would have an opportunity. Now, Jackie was an All-American in football. He was an All-American in basketball. He broke the world's record in the broad jump and track, and he played baseball, all at UCLA. Tremendous athlete. He was the only athlete ever to letter in 4 sports at UCLA. Just a tremendous athlete. And Branch Rickey scouted him, and he realized that he didn't drink, he didn't smoke, he was a religious person, he didn't take drugs, and he decided this would be the right guy. Now, in the office, he said he did some role playing with Jackie, and he says, if I'm on first base and I steal second, and I slide into the base, and someone steps on your hand. What are you going to do? And he says, Mr. Rickey, what do you want me to do? And he says, you can't fight back. He says, do you want a ball player that can't fight back ever? He says, not ever. But he says for the first couple of years. Because he felt that if he started fighting back, the bigots would come out and they would say, see, he's nothing but trouble. Get him out of here. So he wanted to be a clean slate, that this gentleman would take the abuse, which was a tremendous amount of abuse. And Branch Rickey was with him all the way. He also made a rule that Rachel, his wife, could travel with him. He was the only athlete on the Brooklyn Dodgers that had his wife coming along, because Branch Rickey felt that he needed someone that was close to him that could support him. In the first year, he was signed for the Montreal Royals, which was the Dodgers AAA farm club. So in Montreal, he loved it there. He had a great season. People were very welcoming to him, and he really had a good time. And he was doing a terrific job. When he got to Brooklyn the next year, it was far different, because the love that he received from the Canadians was far different than some of the Americans who were very bigoted. Especially problems were going on during the South, during the exhibition period in Florida. And it was very tough for Jackie. But Branch Rickey stood with him the whole time, never let him go, and was always there for support. And it was amazing. He was a wonderful man. And then after he left the Dodgers, Branch Rickey, and Walter O'Malley bought him out, he went to Pittsburgh. And that was, Jackie was never really happy with Walter O'Malley. He didn't like how he pushed him out and this and that. And Jackie was very loyal to Branch. And that kind of played a role with Walter O'Malley, who didn't like that Jackie was so close to Branch Rickey. So they had a little bit of falling out. Of course, Jackie was so good for the team, and when he came there, they won the pennant in 1947, 49, 52, 53, 55, and 56. So 6 of the 10 years that Jackie played for the Brooklyn Dodgers, they won the pennant. And in 55, they also won the World Series and finally beat those damn Yankees. But it was a tremendous thing. And at first there was a petition that all of the ball players for the Brooklyn Dodgers were starting a petition that they didn't want to play with him. Many of the players were from the South. Dixie Walker, amongst other, was very, very strong, good opponent to Jackie, but he was also a wonderful ball player. And Mr. Rickey had Leo DeRocha come and talk to the players. Excuse me. And they said, gentlemen, Jackie Robinson is here to stay. If you want to leave, we'll get you traded. That's fine. But he is here to stay. And they started falling in line. And they started seeing the abuse that Jackie was getting on the field by other teams. And they started to rally around to protect him, to help him, to support him. But the other teams were pretty rough. He couldn't eat with his team. He couldn't sleep with his team in the same hotel. It was very, very tough being the only one. So the only one he had was Rachel to be with him. So Branch Rickey, to my to my eyes, was a tremendous hero, a wonderful baseball man, and he was successful in every ball club that he was at. He was a very sharp guy. He was a little cheap, but he really knew talent, and he was successful wherever he was. I think he was tremendous. If it wasn't for Branch Rickey, this could never have happened. And of course for Jackie, who could not fight back for 2.5 years. And the only way he could fight back was by hitting a home run, stealing a base, driving those pitchers crazy. And that he did. Unbelievable. He stole home 19 times in his career. Imagine that. A ball player's on third base, the pitcher winds up and he takes off. And he also did it once in a World Series. And Yogi Berra to this day always said he's out. Well, he wasn't out. He was called safe. And Rachel told me a story that every time she ran into Yogi would say out, and Rachel would say safe. And they ended up loving each other. They really did.
Very cool.
So that's pretty much the story.
There was a story that Carmen Barra, who came to one of the Sabre meetings they had at the museum that I attended, and she said once that they were at some affair, and Rachel came over to Carmen and asked Carmen if she could have a dance with Yogi. And Carmen said, sure. And Carmen calls Yogi over and says, whatever you do, don't bring up that play.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Alan and Ronnie, that's a classic of that footage and the black and white photo that I've seen and many have seen with Yogi just going berserk on that call.
I asked Dale, who was there, Dale Barra, his son, did Yogi ever get so crazy like that at home? He said, only when we talk back to our mother.
Well, I assume that's probably right, Alan, because Yogi was really funny and
very
loved baseball, and but that one play really set him off, and he was just incensed, and as Ronnie says, even to his dying day, he claimed that Jackie was out, and Rachel and said no, he was safe. I mean, it was that, and all the different angles and the footage. I mean, it's so inconclusive. I mean, whether or not he was touching the plate or Yogi was touching his shoe, it's hard to say, and no one will probably ever know. The umpire made that split second call, and he called him safe. And
they're not replaying those days.
Right.
But
he probably would have taken half an hour.
You got to know Yogi really thought he was out.
Oh yeah,
because you couldn't fake that reaction.
No.
And
no.
I would say he was out based on the reaction. But in any event, it's not remembered. He was called safe, but the Yankees won that game.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Al, would you tell us about Branch Rickey's early history? Because my God, this guy started with the Browns.
Yeah, he was a player.
Sisler in.
Yeah, he was a player for a number of years, and a couple of things happened as a player. One is that he had the record for bases stolen. He was a catcher. Bases, I think some team stole 13 bases against him supposedly, but it's probably mostly off the pitchers. In a game, and he was also the first St. Louis Brown Hall of Famer to 2 home runs in a game. I got that. I answered that on a Sabre trivia contest a whole bunch of years ago, and somebody asked me, "How'd you get that?" I said, I just yelled it out at the last second. They said, "Well, first of all, if it was Sisler, they would never ask the question. Second of all, the only one I could think of was." As a player, was a shortstop named Bobby Wallace who couldn't hit. And all of a sudden, I remember Rickey played for the Browns, so I yelled out Branch Rickey, and I got a standing ovation for that.
Whoa.
It just registered. And
Great.
anyway, so he started to get into the executive end with the Browns. And when George Sisler came out of Michigan, there was some dispute about his age and all that. And Barney Dreyfuss of the Pirates claimed he signed Sisler before Branch Rickey did with the Browns. And it went to the dispute got so bitter it went to the National Commission, which was governing baseball at the time. It consisted of the two league presidents and Gary Herman, who was the owner of the Reds back then. And they ruled 2-1 that Sisler belonged to the Browns. And Barney Dreyfuss, who owned the Pirates, is so incensed that he hated Van Johnson. He hated Gary Herman, who owned the Reds, for going against his league. Sisler, of course, we know, turned into one of the old-time greats. And Rickey was fairly successful with the Browns. And then after as a general manager, and after the Federal League folded, Phil Ball, who was the head of Sinclair Oil, remember them? And he was the owner of in the settlement of the Federal League. He owned the St. Louis Federal League team. He was allowed to buy in to the Browns, to buy the Browns. And so he bought the Browns, and he and Branch Rickey did not get along. So Phil Ball made a move that essentially, sent the Browns to the second fiddle in the city, and eventually drove them out. And he fired Branch Rickey, and Branch Rickey went over to the Cardinals, who, if you look at their history, were the dregs of the dead ball era in the National League. They were pretty bad most the entire 19-20 years of dead ball. And he developed the farm system, and he made them into perennial contenders. And there was a lot of opposition to the farm system because Commissioner Landis, hated the farm system, periodically calling Branch Rickey as and to see him, and railing about how bad the farm system was. But the farm system turned out to be the only way that teams that did not have access to all sorts of money could compete.
Right. What was the objection to the farm system?
Because they controlled 600, 700 players. Rickey would hold tryouts, and anybody who showed any sort of ability would be signed to a minor league contract. And there was a situation where there was one minor league, I think it was in Nebraska, where the Cardinals owned all 8 teams in the league. It was extremely extensive. They hired anybody that felt they brought in anybody they felt had the slightest bit of ability, and let talent weed itself out.
Right.
So he built up and had multiple players, and he did this with the Dodgers also. He had multiple players at each position, and he, if he liked the regular at who's playing at the position for the Cardinals, he would sell the farmhands who were behind these guys to various teams, especially the Chicago Cubs, for all sorts of excess money than what these guys deserved. There's a story that Bill
George Weiss do the same thing later on?
Yeah, Weiss picked that up and did the same thing later on. In fact, when Branch Rickey went over to the Dodgers and Weiss was still running the Yankees, they were the only 2 general managers who were signing players during World War II. So when World War II ended, they were stocked, and almost every other team was shorthanded.
Let me ask you this, George. What did Washington do during World War II in terms of signing players, keeping them secure, this, that, and the other thing?
Well, the Washington situation was a little bit different. First of all, they didn't have, Clark Griffith virtually ran it on a penny, but his connection really in the minor leagues was basically Cuba, and that's where most of their minor league players were being drawn from. The Cuban, so-called Cuban connection. And that's the one where it started back in the 40s, and a lot of my dad's teammates were Cubans. And, it was just a matter of stocking the ball clubs. Washington had a very small minor league organization when compared with the Dodgers and some of the other teams. Washington really had a AAA in Tennessee with Chattanooga and a AA farm club, and that was basically it. So,
George, was it a happy clubhouse with the Cubans and the Anglos?
Yeah, I think, I never heard my dad, mention any problem. The biggest problem was the language barrier. That was where it was. It wasn't, there were black Cubans, there were lighter skinned Cubans, but, they were ball players and they talked baseball language and they pretty much could get along. But if they wanted to speak in terms of, everyday life, it really was difficult. And the Cubans were not used to, obviously, the culture in this country, so that was a big adjustment for them. But
George,
the baseball...
George, there's one written thing I want to mention. Bill Veeck wrote about this in Veckers and Rec, because Bill Veeck was working for the Cubs in that stage, and this was right... when Branch Rickey convinced the Cub ownership to buy Dizzy Dean, whose arm was gone, after Dizzy Dean was hurt in that All-Star game, his arm was gone, and Rickey wanted to sell Dizzy Dean for the Cubs for $185,000, which is huge money back then, and a couple of players, and Bexay told Wrigley, he says, you go through with this, you're going to stamp yourself as a sucker for all time. And Wrigley said he was going to do it, and he did it. And Rickey, the Cubs became one of his favorite patsies. The rest of the time he was with the Cardinals, and when he went over to the Dodgers. In fact, when he was with the Dodgers, he sold Dee Fondy and Chuck Connors, who were both first basemen, to the Cubs at the same time in like 1950. So he had to play the Cubs like a violin for most of the time.
He ended up getting Andy Pafko from the Cubs, am I right?
No, Pafko went to the Dodgers. He was gone by then.
Oh, okay.
Rickey was gone. Rickey was in Pittsburgh by then. But he would sell players to the Cubs and then later on, he when he was with the Dodgers, he understood that number of these teams had threadbare farm systems, so we would sell our old buddy Irv Noren to the Washington for the $100,000. He sold Sam Jethro, who he had no place because he wasn't going to be out tonight in center field. He sold him to the Braves for $125,000. He sold Chico Carrasquel, who was not going to be out Pee Wee Reese to the White Sox for $100,000. And he knew, these teams didn't have much.
Are you thinking of Fernandez?
No, Chico Carrasquel.
Oh, okay. I didn't know he had Chico
Carrasquel. Yeah, he's a Dodger farmfor and he was playing with Fort Worth in the Texas League, and Rickey sold him to the White Sox for an awful lot of money because he wasn't going to beat Pee Wee Reese out.
Yeah, it's interesting now. You mentioned Chico Carrasquel and Ronnie and Don. Chico Carrasquel, his uncle was Alex Carrasquel, who was a teammate, a pitcher with Washington. So that name in Venezuelan baseball, that is huge. Chico and Alex were idols in Venezuela because they were both major league ball players and were both related to one another.
And Louis Aparicio succeeded him.
Chico Carrasquel was traded to the Indians after 1955 when the White Sox acquired Larry Doby to make room for Aparicio.
Right.
Wow. Wow.
And that was Aparicio was a great stolen base, a tremendous player, and that was part of the Go-Go Sox. I mean, they were very fast, didn't have a lot of power, but they were a tremendous ball club, played small ball, and Louis was just a sensational base runner and shortstop.
Now, the point I was trying to make that even when Branch Rickey got to the Dodgers in his later years with them, he would still find teams to overprice these farmhands, because I said, Irv Nora's not going to be out Duke Snyder, Carrasco's not going to be out Pee Wee Reese, the two first basemen were not going to be out Gil Hodges. And that's what happened when you got multiple, and the Yankees did the same thing with George Weiss, when you have multiple players at a position and you have somebody established there who was not going to be beaten out, that Branch Rickey found the ways to make, I think he also was paid on percentages of sales that he made by both the Cardinals and the Dodgers, and he was also, I think, paid on attendance.
Okay. Hey, let me take time out a second to introduce our guest panelist, Don Stokes. Don is an avid New York Jet fan and has a website on a page on Facebook on the Jets, Freezing and Flushing. And he's been a real contributor to Comfortably Zoned over the years. But I come to find out Don is an avid baseball fan as well. And he is in the stage of producing an upcoming podcast on the network on the Jets. But I didn't know you had such interest in baseball, and I'd like to find out a little bit about it. And I'd like to introduce Don Stokes. Say hello, Don, with those great pipes.
Well, thank you very much there, Ralph. My
I don't want to talk. After that voice, no one wants to follow that voice.
Okay. Well, I mean, I've been listening to this stuff about Branch Rickey, and I have to admit I've learned some things I didn't know. But in regards, I think Branch Rickey doesn't get a lot of credit where he should have got credit for. I mean, it was him really that created the statistical analysis that we now call sabermetrics, because he hired Alan Ross in 1947 to really break down statistical research, and also realizing using Ross research is how important on-base percentage was compared to batting average. I mean, years ago, they used to think batting average was a wear-all for everything and thought that was the way that you judge a player. So Bill James, I guess, is the father of sabermetrics, but really Branch Rickey was the first guy to use it. And also, getting back to Rickey, nobody really mentions his contributions to the Pittsburgh Pirates. He helped develop a lot of their players.
They had, when I was at the convention in Pittsburgh in June, they had a panel on Branch Rickey. They had somebody who worked with him, they had a curator at the Library of Congress, which has something like 20,000 copies of Branch Rickey's correspondence and scouting reports and all sorts of stuff back and forth. And they had the original player, Frank Thomas, the third baseman outfielder who played with the Pirates and the Mets and assorted other teams during his career. And Rickey was hired after O'Malley and Rickey fought for control of the Dodgers. And O'Malley beat Rickey out. In fact, O'Malley hated Rickey so much that he would fine all the employees money if they mentioned Rickey in his presence. O'Malley, and Ron can verify this, O'Malley and Jackie Robinson did not get along because O'Malley regarded Jackie Robinson as a Branch Rickey man, and
absolutely,
yeah, and they really did not get along. And O'Malley was looking to get rid of Jackie Robinson at various points after he took over from Branch Rickey. Branch Rickey came to the Pirates. He unloaded, over the next couple of years, he unloaded all the veterans, including Ralph Kiner, who, according to a guy who did tremendous research on his relationship with Kiner and spoke at the convention, that he thought Kiner was very overvalued and had a very, very high, sense of his worth. And finally, he was able to unload Kiner in 1953. So he was general manager there when they had 4 years of finishing last place. They had a team in 1952 that won 42 games. But he did, during the time, sign most of the players that wound up on the team that won the Pennant World Series in 1960. But the first few years that he was there, the team was pretty bad.
If I'm not mistaken, I think it was Rickey that had something to do with signing Roberto Clemente.
Yeah.
Who had been
they drafted Clemente.
Dodgers.
They drafted Sukaforth, saw Clemente, who was being, when he had that 1 year in Montreal, they would play him every 3 or 4 days. And Clemente was very, very upset. And Sukaforth, who came over, Clyde Sukaforth, who went over to Pittsburgh with Branch Rickey, said, when they had to finish last and had the first pick in the minor league draft, he said, you got to take this guy.
Yeah.
So he did. And they also, a couple of years before, they also wound up taking Elroy Face out of the Dodger system.
Uh-huh. Right.
Was there any rumor or any talk of Branch Rickey getting Jackie Robinson from the Dodgers?
No. Jackie Robinson was not. He was making too much. He was making like $40,000, and that was too much from what they were paying most of the Pirates after they got rid of Kiner.
Okay.
Now I got a question I wanted to ask you, Alan, and Ronnie both, and Don. But my understanding was the fact that if you said that O'Malley and Jackie did not get along because Jackie was Branch Rickey's protege, when O'Malley is in Los Angeles, he's trying to trade Jackie, from my understanding, to the Giants.
Yeah, well, that was after 1956.
Right, and that was the cause, and that caused Jackie
to retire.
He was going to retire, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's correct.
I think Ronnie would say he was about to retire anyway. Am I correct?
Yes, he was. He had a big relationship with Mr. Black, who owned Chock full of Nuts, and he had a commitment from Mr. Black that any time he wanted to, he could come over and be part of Chock full of Nuts.
Yeah,
so
or he became a vice president when he retired.
A vice president, correct? Right,
yeah.
Exactly.
And
so it was an open-ended invitation that any year that he wanted to come in, he could. So he decided that instead of playing for the Giants, which he really didn't want to do, he decided to retire instead. And he was already 38 years old, you remember. Most rookies...
Hey, let's talk about Branch Rickey when he left the Pirates. By now, he's in his mid-70s, maybe 80, and he goes on to be a consultant with St. Louis. And if I'm not mistaken, he was a key cog in building that team to what it was. Can you speak to that, Al Blumkin?
Well, basically, that's not quite true because Branch Rickey he passed away in 1965 at the age of 81, and he was brought in the in the 60s. He was responsible for some extent of the firing of Johnny King, but they brought him in to be a consultant, and the general manager at the time was Bing Devine. And the Cardinals were going nowhere this type of thing doesn't work, because the Pirates had that back in the 20s, and they didn't win anything until Fred Clark, who was way past his prime, was ousted as a consultant there, because he was Branch Rickey when he came to the Cardinals in the 60s was stepping on a lot of toes. And being the Cardinals in 1964 at the beginning of the season were going nowhere and doing anything, and Bing Devine orchestrated the Lou Brock trade. And after Lou Brock came to the Cardinals, they started taking off, and then when the Phillies collapsed at the end of 1964, the Cardinals were the beneficiaries of it. And Bing Devine quit as general manager because of Rickey's interference, and then Keane went from the Cardinals to the Yankees because the Yankees fired Yogi after the 1964, and Keane was a total disaster with the Yankees.
Okay. Now,
but Branch Rickey did not. That was in 1960.
In his baseball life was the Continental League.
Yeah, he was the one who was a proponent of the Continental League, because they're thinking because of essentially there was no National League team in New York, and he got the idea of putting a Continental League together, which consisted of 8 teams, and really never got off the ground. Most of the cities, I think all of them except for Buffalo, are now in the major leagues right now. But he, that provided the impetus of the first expansion. The National League decided that rather than be faced with the American League expanded in 1961, the National League decided also that they expanded to New York as the way to throw off the Continental League. So once the Mets came into existence, the Continental League was an idea whose time had passed, but it accomplished its purpose.
Absolutely. Now, you take that career, the Browns, the Cardinals, the Dodgers, the Pirates, whatever role he played in the Cardinals in the 60s, was there anything positive that came out of Rickey's being there in the
Cardinals? No, he was only there for about a year. Okay, but Dick Rowe told me a story when I interviewed him in 1985. Dick Rowe went into the Army for 2 years in 53 and 54. Dick Rowe had played part of the 52-53 NBA season with the Pistons. He averaged almost 12 a game. This is before the shot clock came in. So he went into the Army, and when he came out, he wanted to do both. And he cited Gene Conley, as somebody who did both. Branch Rickey said to him, and he was still referring to him as Mr. Rickey 30 years later. And he said that you can't do both, because if you play basketball, you're going to be playing 45 minutes a game, and you can play shortstop for us. You're going to be playing 150 games a year. And so Groth said he opted for baseball because that was where the money was. There's nobody, outside Bob Cousy and a couple of others, nobody was really getting paid the NBA in those days. But he still, and from what I understand, the only player or employee of Branch Rickey who didn't call him Mr. Rickey was Dizzy Dean.
Oh, really?
Who called him Branch. Yeah.
That's funny.
And one time
he was a heck of a baseball man.
One time, and I was up in Cooperstown. They had a guy doing a one-man show of playing Branch Rickey, and Rickey said, the character said he went to law. Branch Rickey was a law school graduate. He actually was a lawyer for a couple of years before he started to he got into baseball management, and said, I prepared all this wonderful education, blah 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 blah, to spend time with somebody like Dizzy Dean.
All right. Dizzy Dean, he was criticized for his grammar when he was the NBC
No, Chris has his grammar all the time.
All the time.
And he comes back and he says, some of those people out there that don't like the word ain't making that much money.
Now, my favorite Dizzy Dean announcing story is that there was a restriction on announcers giving weather reports during World War II. So one time there was a rain delay. So you people want to know why we're not playing right now, just stick your heads out the window.
All right. Hey, let's go around the room and see if anybody left anything out that they wanted to say about Mr. Branch Rickey. Start with Mr. Stokes, Don Stokes, who gave us this great fact that I had no idea about the numbers and about that he hired Roth, who was a great statistician of his time. So thank you for that info. Don, anything else that comes to your mind about Rickey?
No, well, basically, I think Rickey just shaped the face of baseball as we see it today with the start of the farm system. I mean, I guess he had the Cardinals started it, and a lot of teams picked up on it. And if not for Branch Rickey, we wouldn't know baseball as we see, not just with the Jackie Robinson situation, but also with the Latin influence.
Right.
Oh, yeah,
right.
Absolutely. A biggie. But again, let's credit Clark Griffith with that George case. Am I correct? Give him.
Yeah, well,
credit.
I did want to mention that. I mean, what Don just said. I mean, I had talked about it earlier, the Cuban connection, and of course today, and there's so many Latins playing baseball, but that really started with Mr. Griffith. And by the way, I just wanted to mention a lot of the older players, they used to talk about the owners with that surname, Mr. Connie Mack was Mr. Mack. Clark Griffith was Mr. Griffith. Branch Rickey was Mr. Rickey. That's just the sign of respect, and that's the way they referred to those great general managers and owners of the ball clubs.
Right. Well, I just created next week's show. It's the Cuban Connection. How about that? You like that, George?
Well, I could talk a few minutes about that. That's for sure.
Yeah,
all right.
I bet you could.
Well, that's my job. Get you talking and get everybody talking. So, anything, Ronnie Rabinovitz, that you want to say about Branch Rickey in closing?
Well, he was a tremendous baseball man. He knew talent. He knew how to find talent. He knew how to develop farm systems, which he did, and the Dodgers were very successful in their farm system because of him. He was just an all-around excellent person to understand and know baseball and to find talent. He was tremendous that way. Excellent.
Terrific. Al Blumkin.
You know, a couple of things that they said about Branch Rickey is that he liked ball players and money, and he didn't like to mix the two of them.
Right.
And because of the farm system, and he met the farm system, if the player didn't like what he's offered, says, "We could always send you somewhere and bring somebody else who was cheaper." And Sloyle once said of him, he'd go into a vault to get you a nickel change. But aside from that, he was, as everybody else has said, he was a tremendous influence on the game of baseball, and he initiated a lot of things that are still being used today. And his breaking of the color line with Jackie Robinson was to a large extent heroic, because every other owner was opposed to it. 15 others were opposed to it. So, he is in the Hall of Fame. He's been in the Hall of Fame for a very long time, and deservedly so.
And he also, when Jackie became inducted into the Hall of Fame, Branch Rickey introduced him in Cooperstown. He was.
I know that. Yeah, Rickey was still around there.
Yeah. That was in
Hey,
1962.
before I turn it to George to close us out and for him to give any Branch Rickey memories, I just want to tell you what sticks in my head about Branch Rickey, and it applies not just to baseball, but to life. His famous expression, addition by subtraction. Now, that can mean whatever it means, but to you at the moment, but I can't tell you how many times I've used that expression in thinking about baseball, thinking about life, thinking about relationships, business stuff, this, that, and the other thing. So thank you for that, Mr. Rickey. George Case, close us on out with your memories of Branch that you didn't cover, and thank you for another great week.
Okay, well, Ralph, thank you, and we've had a wonderful discussion about Branch Rickey, and I just wanted to mention one rather obscure fact, but I think rather pertinent, and that has to do with baseball history and Branch Rickey. And one thing that I'd like to bring out in that regard, World War I, Branch Rickey commanded a chemical warfare unit, and in that unit were Ty Cobb and Christy Mathewson. So you have three, future Hall of Famers all in the chemical warfare unit in World War I, and a training accident that happened during that time really cost Christy Mathewson his life. He developed tuberculosis as a result of the accident and died at a very young age. So, we've been talking about World War II, baseball and baseball history with Branch Rickey, but he also had a very much of an identification with World War I in the fact that he did serve his country and did command a unit that had two of the greatest players of all time in that same unit. So that is my little contribution to the history of Branch Rickey and baseball, and I really enjoyed having everybody on. I think it was a wonderful discussion, and look forward to, talking next week about the Cuban connection or whatever we want to talk about. But this is really a sense of baseball history, and Branch Rickey was such an integral part of that history.
He sure was. He sure was, George.
Hey, thank you on behalf of Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. Your sponsorship means more to us in terms of legitimizing us than it does to you. So, much appreciation.
Thank you, Ralph.
Okay.
Thank you, George.
We'll be back next week. Al Blumkin, Don Stokes, thank you. Ronnie Rabinovitz.
Welcome.
Wow. Great stuff. All of us, this has been one of the best we've ever done. And we top each other. We top it every week, it seems. So thanks for listening, everybody. We'll be back same time. Say it, Al. When will we be back?
Same bad time, same bad channel.
Love hearing your voice say that.
All right. Okay.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Good,
Bye-bye.
everybody.
Goodbye,
Thank
everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.
This has been a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.